Stay frosty.
Well, welcome back to the show, and I've just been amazed at the great quality of our speakers, and thanks once again to our amazing ambassadors around the world shedding a light on this climate lockdown that's going on in Canada. It's almost unbelievable. I also want to say a huge thank you to you, Alex Newman, for coming on. It's great to see you again. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you, Jim. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I mean, we've been hearing about people being banned from walking their dogs. They're not allowed to hunt. They're not allowed to go fishing. They're not allowed to step foot in the forests or the woodlands in Nova Scotia. And now it's spreading to their provinces without penalty of $40,000, $50,000 fines. This is absolute madness. What, as an American citizen, when you see this, when you hear this, what's your first reaction to it?
It's totally illegitimate. It's totally tyrannical, but it's only the first step of many if they're not stopped. If people don't resist, they do a lot of these things as kind of trial balloons, right? They'll see how much will people put up with. And the more people accept, the more tyranny they'll get. So I think there's some really clear parallels here with what we saw during COVID. And in fact, years ago, I started warning that the globalist totalitarians were openly saying they wanted to use the COVID policies to stop the alleged climate crisis, the climate emergency. They even used some of the same rhetoric. We're going to have flattening of the curve by preventing people from doing things that they otherwise might want to do, like travel, go outside, things like that. And so if they're allowed to get away with this in Canada, it will get worse, not just in Canada, but around the world. And folks, I'm telling you, the World Bank has been talking about this. The World Economic Forum has been talking about this. The United Nations has been talking about this. American politicians have been talking about this. People like John Kerry, people like Al Gore have talked about a climate emergency so severe that it would require COVID-style policies to save the world from alleged man-made climate change. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's a first taste of what we're going to get if we don't push back on these megalomaniacs.
I mean, it's absolutely incredible how these policies that they're coming up with aren't actually about tackling climate change or helping the environment. It all seems to revolve around controlling people's movements, restricting people's freedoms. If they were really that keen on solving the problems, they would be tackling the issues in many different ways. But no, it's all about control, isn't it? And why is it that they are testing this out on Canada again? We saw brutal lockdowns during the COVID era, and you're quite right to mention that. I've been seeing very, very similar parallels to this as well. Do you think that Canada is a bit of a test case, and this might actually, if they get away with it, that they might actually start rolling this out to other countries around the world?
No question about it, Jim. And I've seen this over and over and over again. I've got a long and historic connection with the Kingdom of Sweden, not on purpose, but I lived there for many years. And what I realized living in Sweden is that it is a test market. And so big companies use Sweden as a test market. They'll try out new products there. They'll try out new marketing programs and see how they go. And there's a few big benefits to Sweden for these tests. One, people are very compliant. Two, it's kind of a self-contained market in that nobody outside of Sweden really speaks Swedish. So if something goes wrong, whatever, it'll get reported in the Swedish media, but people in the United States, people in the UK generally won't hear about it. And so what we're seeing in Canada now, I think, is the same type of program. They even do it domestically, where they'll try out some of the craziest policies in California or Illinois. They'll see how people react. They'll see what kind of arguments are persuasive in convincing people to drop or at least lessen their opposition to the policy. So I'm not surprised at all that we're seeing this in Canada. Canada's kind of easy pickings, I think, unfortunately, partly because social cohesiveness is being undermined, partly because Canadians are just and I'm speaking in generalities here, but less liberty-minded than Americans have historically been, less likely to resist, less likely to get really serious. They're much nicer, you might say, and much less rebellious than Americans. So Canadians, I think, end up getting the brunt of this, and we saw it during COVID. I think we're seeing it again now.
I love the Canadian people, and I absolutely love the American people as well. And I see you guys as like real brothers and sisters. I mean, I know there's differences there, but you've got a lot more in common than that, which separates you, I think. But what I want to do, Alex, is I want to take a step back, because our international ambassadors and their guests have given a really deep dive into what's actually going on in Canada with this climate lockdown. And I want to sort of take a step back. I want to look at it from a more of a strategic overview. And there's one thing in particular which I want to come back to that you said when you were on the show, probably 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 months ago. And it was something that you mentioned. Now, I didn't get a chance because I was on, I think it might have been Liz Gunn from New Zealand segment that was on. You mentioned something and it really resonated with me. So I didn't get a chance to really ask you about it, but I'm going to ask you about it again now. You'd said something along the lines of that these dreadful politicians, the dreadful leaders that we've got in our respective countries, with the exception of the United States now, I have to say, but they're so bad. Carney, Trudeau before him, Starmer in the United Kingdom, Macron in France, and I mean, the list goes on. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to allude at that point that this was actually being done on purpose. They were putting such dreadful people in that when somebody came along that offered a one world system, a one world new order, a global government, that people might be ready to actually do away with their sovereignty because their leadership is so dreadfully bad and corrupt and just really hopeless. Is that something that you still think might be the part of the plan?
Absolutely. And I think there really is an agenda, Jim, to turn people against their own nations, right? They can't go straight into this one world order as long as people are still attached to their country, as long as people are still attached to the institutions. And so I think you actually see this most clearly in the United States, almost counterintuitively. Because the institutions that we have in the United States are really precious. I believe that the people who set them up and the design of the institutions has been really historically unique. Now, obviously, a lot of credit goes to our Anglo-Saxon forefathers. The founding fathers of America didn't dream all this stuff up. They got some of it from the Magna Carta and from King Alfred and from the English Civil War. It wasn't unique innovations, but it was the first time that liberty-minded Christian people had the opportunity to really just start building a new system of government from the ground up. And so there's a very deliberate effort to turn Americans in particular, and it's true all across the Western world, but I'm looking mostly at America right now, because the institutions in America are not compatible with the global system they want to build. Even the founding documents are not compatible with the system they want to build. If you read our Declaration of Independence, the list of reasons why we ultimately ended up declaring independence from Britain, very, very inflammatory statements from the perspective of a tyrant or a globalist. The idea that God created us equally, the idea that God gave us rights, the idea that government exists to protect those rights. I mean, you can't have a totalitarian New World Order if people are still clinging to those ideas. And so if you look in the United States, you see an unbelievable effort. And you see it in the media, you see it in the education system, you see it in academia, you see it in virtually everything. You even see it in advertising, in business, this agenda to try to demonize the history of the United States, the founders of the United States, the institutions of the United States. The more they can try to connect, for example, our founding documents, our founding fathers, to racism, slavery, things like this, they actually invert the truth, right? But the more they can try to make that connection in the minds of people, the more likely Americans will be, not maybe tomorrow, but 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road, the more likely they'll be to say, well, you know what, I guess they're right. These institutions were created by, dead white guys, some of whom owned slaves. And, they weren't perfect by our modern sensibilities. And so let's just burn the whole thing down and start again. And I think part of the reason why we see these just absolutely atrocious leaders, people who are like openly obnoxious, people who nobody in their right mind would look at them and think, wow, that's an inspirational, great leader. I think part of it is they want to turn Americans and people across the Western world against their own governments, against their own institutions. And we've even seen this in other places, like Sri Lanka as a recent example. the Sri Lankan government implemented a bunch of policies that the UN gave it. Some of them, of course, in response to alleged man-made climate change, and they got a revolution, right? They overthrew the system. So I think the French Revolution offers a very good historical example of what I'm talking about. Was the monarchy in France perfect? Absolutely not. I mean, they're oppressive and tyrannical in many ways. But you look at the French revolutionaries, they were deliberately stirring up unrest. They were deliberately exaggerating the evils of the monarchy, not because they were freedom fighters, but because they wanted to burn down everything that existed before so they could set up their new system. We saw the same thing in Bolshevik Russia, right? And so they take down all the old, and then the new thing that you end up with is far, far worse than any of the real and imagined problems that you thought you were throwing off.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of history, and I was just thinking back to the United States there for a moment when they fought against British rule, and I always like to remind people that it only took 3% of Americans to actually stand up and fight. In fact, only 3% did. That's the crazy. 97% didn't. They were kind of just going along with it. But 3% of the Americans said, no, we want our independence. We don't want to be ruled by the king of Great Britain. We want to be independent. And they did, and they achieved it. And the thing is, if 3% of people in every country said, do you know what, we're just not going to go along with this. There's not a state apparatus. There's not a military. There's not a police force that will be able to stop even 3%, because the most countries, 3% would be an overwhelming majority of people that the state apparatus could not resist. But it goes back to fear. It goes back to control. It goes back to psychological operations. And I know that you've had a lot to say about this sort of fear tactics that they use. Do you think what's happening in Canada, where we hear that 60% of people in those provinces that are being affected by this climate lockdown are actually terrified? 40% say, wait a minute, there's something not right here. But 60% are actually really frightened of what they're seeing. And the mainstream media are escalating that tension, escalating that fear. How important is it for people to see through the psychological operations? And can you give us some indication of what a typical psychological operation might be and what it looks like?
Yeah, so I think we're witnessing a psychological operation, probably multiple psychological operations at the same time. And so for people who aren't really familiar with this terminology, it is a military term, and psychological operations are actually a regular part of military operations. It can be something as simple as dropping leaflets on a town to try to get them to surrender before you even actually have to invade, just to make the war a little easier, to something much bigger, like trying to hoodwink an entire national population into being terrified of, say, imaginary or invisible enemy, as they called the COVID, or some other problem, like a climate change, a COVID. Pick your thing. And so this is actually warfare being conducted against the population. And so step one here is to terrorize people enough about climate change to make them believe that some sort of drastic government intervention is necessary. And climate change is the ultimate example of that. To go back to your point earlier, Jim, you can very easily see that this is about control and not about climate change. And there's just so many different lines of evidence, so many different lines of reasoning we could look at to prove that. But if you look back at the global cooling hysteria of the 1970s and 80s, it was the same exact solution. Less fossil fuels, less energy, less freedom, more power for the government, more international cooperation and globalism. And of course, they also proposed melting the Arctic ice cap by covering it with black soot, to quote Newsweek magazine, Our Cooling World, 1975. And now we're seeing the same thing, just with global warming or climate change. So the fear mongering is a major psychological operation. And then there is the backlash that they know will inevitably come, and then they try to either divert that or channel that into something that would be useful for their purposes. And we saw that, like, for example, with the Tea Party movement in the United States. When the Tea Party movement rose up, you had globalist organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations openly talking about, how do we hijack this? How do we steer it either into a harmless direction, or even better yet, something that we can use and exploit for our agenda? And to leave the climate just for a moment, to look now at the United States, at examples that we're presently seeing, they caused a massive crisis by opening up our borders. They let millions and millions of illegal aliens, many of them highly trained special forces, terrorist operators, intelligence assets from various hostile foreign governments. And then they said, oh, look how terrible. Now your country's full of dangerous illegal immigrants, and some of them are here for bad reasons. You should be very scared. But don't worry, the government will save you. We'll give you a digital ID, and we'll do biometric scans of everything, and we'll surveil everybody, and then you won't have to worry anymore about the problem. So they created a problem, then they made us scared of the problem that they created as a pretext to give us even more tyranny. So this is you might even call it standard operating procedure for the totalitarians. And you can go back all the way to Frederick Bastiat, over 200 years ago. The great lawmaker and philosopher in France, Frederick Bastiat, author of The Law and many other great works, he pointed out this tendency among the tyrants of the day 200 years ago. He said they concoct the poison and the antidote in the same laboratory. So the poison, you get scared, you demand solutions, and then they give you the antidote, which they had been planning for all along. Same operation over and over again. Just substitute the terms and the issues, but it's the same program over and over again, Jim.
Ab ordo chaos, order out of chaos, the Hegelian dialect. It's been the playbook for hundreds of years, actually. I think one of the things, Alex, that a lot of people say is, why now? And I think perhaps the advent of new technology, robotics, and in particular, artificial intelligence has maybe given the parasite class, the so-called elites, I prefer to call them the parasite class, because that's really what they are. Well, I mean, I think that they are now in a position where they think they've really got the technological upper hand. And there's a lot of these technocrats in those globalist orders, and there's a lot of globalist orders out there. I mean, the World Economic Forum is but one. They're sort of the financial arm of it, but the Trilateral Commission, the Council of 300, the Bilderberg Group, I mean, there's a lot of them. And they all compete with each other, and they're quite ruthless to each other as well. But they have one thing in common, and it goes back to this global one world system that they seem to absolutely desire to have. But the other interesting thing, Alex, in all of this is that they keep on going on about UN Agenda 2030, these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which on the surface look all right, they sound all right, until you start to look back at the methods and the structure of what they actually are talking about. I wonder, though, because why is it they seem to be obsessed with the year 2030? It's almost as if they're trying to get us completely locked down with the 15-minute smart cities, the digital idea, and all these control mechanisms for a reason. And I detect that they might be slightly uneasy. Is it because there is a great awakening coming? Scenes that's provoking them.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, Jim. And I don't know if it's you who's got an internet issue or me, but yes, I would argue 100% for sure. There was a genius, Robert Welch, who back in the 1950s started sounding the alarm about the global parasite class, as you quite hilariously refer to them. And he warned that as they got closer to their end objective, they were going to have to do the equivalent of running naked through the streets. And at that point, everybody was going to see clearly what they were doing. It wasn't like they could hide it anymore. And that's, I believe, the stage that we're very rapidly approaching. 10 years ago, if you pointed out these things, oh, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. Oh, that would never happen. Now we're seeing a shift in the rhetoric. Now, but why wouldn't you want a one world government? Why wouldn't you want the UN to oversee the internet and free speech and artificial intelligence and the economy and the education of your children? So it's a very rapid shift that we're seeing. And so I think these parasites, these global elitists, these diabolical plotters understand that they're now in a do or die moment. If current trends continue, people waking up by the millions every year all over the world. This is not something that's just happening in the West. It's happening all over the world. People are realizing that evil people are trying to enslave humanity. Right? And this is now a global awakening. If these trends continue, right? And nobody's going back to sleep. It's not like people wake up to what's going on and then say, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to go watch CNN again and see what they have to tell me today about what I should be scared of. They can project the lines, right? You keep going at this rate for another 10 years, you're going to have a critical mass. Forget 3%. We'll be at 10, 20, 30, 40%. They're cooked. They're done. And for them, this isn't like, they can't just say, oh, sorry about that. We had a bad idea. Please forgive us. We won't do it again. They understand that if they get caught, if they don't succeed, they might well spend the rest of their life in jail. They will lose their fortunes. They will lose their power. They will lose their mansions, and they may end up rotting in a prison cell. So they're now at this moment where they have to accelerate this. They have to ruthlessly demonize anybody who stands against them. And they have to act like now we're ridiculous, not for pointing out what they're doing, but for disagreeing with what they're doing. And I think we're going to watch that materialize here in the next few years. It's going to be very obvious to almost everybody that something bad is happening. And, that's it's an incredible time of opportunity to stop these people, but it's also a time of great danger because they think we're in the final phases here.
Well, I must admit, I think you're absolutely on point with all of that. And I want to go back to something you mentioned there that was to do with mass illegal immigration. I mean, up until just not that long ago, until Trump got into the office of president again, the U.S. southern border was completely porous. It was non-existent. There was tens of millions of people coming in there, as you quite correctly said. They could have probably were foreign agents, terrorists, whatever they were, pouring in there. But we're seeing this in the United Kingdom. We're seeing it in Ireland to a great extent there as well. We're seeing it right across Europe. And I was speaking as a guest speaker in Moldova at the Make Europe Great Again conference there just a few weeks ago. And I described it as an existential threat to Western civilization, because when a country, you take the United Kingdom, when a country gets filled with enough people who are not native indigenous population, that country ceases to be what it is. And any nation that doesn't have borders ceases to be a nation. And right now, when you were talking about earlier on about the turning people against their own sovereign nations, we have been seeing that in the United Kingdom on an unprecedented level. It's almost unbelievable, but there are councils in England taking down Union Jacks and St. George flags because they say they don't want to offend other people. But I know, I mean, it's ludicrous, and they're really doing it. Right now, there is a major pushback of a movement called Raise the Flag. There are thousands of people all across the United Kingdom raising Union flags and St. George's crosses and saltires in Scotland and Welsh flags. And there are those on the far left who are going along, and they're actually assaulting people for raising the flag. How crazy does it have to get before the vast majority of people wake up? And is there likely to be a period of great chaos, not in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, but perhaps in a year to 2 years' time? Can you see that actually unfolding in that way?
Absolutely, Jim. And I've been warning that these evildoers, the parasite class, have been planning for massive civil unrest. In fact, I believe they want a civil war in the United States of America. I think the evidence is overwhelming that they're trying to stir that up. And what you see is through the mass immigration, for example, they knowingly, and it wasn't just that they left the border open, they were literally helping people get to the United States. And I saw this happen in Sweden, too. The Swedish government was flying airplanes down to Somalia and Ethiopia and Eritrea and bringing back planes full of refugees. Same thing in the United States. Then they get there and they start teaching them, oh, you just came to a super racist country. This is a terrible place. We all have white privilege, and you should really object to that. You should help tear down the existing society so that a new, multicultural utopia can emerge in its place. What kind of society would import foreigners and then tell them and teach their children that the society is evil and should be destroyed? Only people who hope to destroy that society. So that's exactly what we're watching now. And there was a great individual who served on the National Security Council during Trump's first term. He's passed away now. His name was Rich Higgins. He was the director of policy and planning on the National Security Council, and he wrote a memo. It's now called the Higgins Memo. I encourage people to read it. He described this very interesting alliance coalition. He said basically what we were witnessing was a Maoist-style insurgency being orchestrated by what he described as the deep state. And he said it was bringing together a coalition of globalists and Islamists and socialists and communists who, at least on the surface, wouldn't seem to have a lot in common. But he said they were all united on this: the destruction of the United States, not just as a nation. That wasn't enough to just destroy the American nation. It had to be discredited and destroyed even as an ideal, so that 100 years from now in the history books, America wouldn't be this great country founded on noble principles that unfortunately crashed. It would be a horror show that thankfully humanity was able to crush. And so I think they are preparing for that. And I've actually talked to people who have firsthand knowledge of this. There's a lot of money going into this. They're deliberately organizing subversive organizations. There's a communist network across Latin America called the Foro de Sao Paulo. It was founded by Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the wannabe Marxist dictator of Brazil. It was founded by Fidel Castro. This was many years ago. Of course, he's dead now. The Sandinistas, the mass murdering communist group in Nicaragua, and then the FARC, the Marxist narco-terrorist organization in Colombia. And their goal, they said, was to reclaim in the Americas what had been lost in Eastern Europe, namely communism. And so they were working openly with the Barack Obama administration and with the Biden administration. In fact, George Soros helped bring some of their allies to power in Colombia during the last administration. They are preparing for massive levels of unrest. And I believe, at least in the United States, it may manifest itself as a civil war. And so I've been trying to warn my fellow Americans, folks, don't fall for the trap. They're trying to get you to hate your neighbor, hate the guy across the street who maybe watches too much CNN. It's the old trick, divide and conquer. We're watching it now.
As tensions rise in the United Kingdom and other nations across Europe, there is definitely a pushback. I wonder if the globalists, those that are trying to sort of sow this dissent and cause this division, are almost like filling these countries with mass illegal young migrant men, because it's not asylum seekers, it's not women and children, it's coming in, it's young men aged between 19 and 29 or 30. If they can get enough numbers in there, and they're then activated effectively, almost like an insurance policy. So if the indigenous populations of the United Kingdom and Ireland, France, Germany, Sweden, whatever, actually say, we're not having this anymore, those young men, those military-age men get activated. And I want to tie it back into what we're witnessing in Canada, because this whole climate lockdown, once again, it's about controlling people and using fear. But I think it's such an important point that I want to get your reaction to that. Do you believe that they could be activated in a violent way to really put down the indigenous populations, or at least cause such violence and fear that it would intimidate people into silence?
No question about it, Jim. No question about it. And again, I have I've spoken with many people who have firsthand knowledge of this. The U.S. Congress actually found out that a lot of the people coming across the border were associated with the People's Liberation Army of China. So they knew that the people who were coming across the border were, in many cases, special operators with advanced knowledge of explosives and sabotage, with blueprints for our water treatment facilities. There's no doubt in my mind that that's one of the major reasons why they've imported so many hostile foreigners. And you're right, we're talking here overwhelmingly military-aged men. Anybody listening to us right now knows that doesn't make any sense. What man would leave his wife, his daughter, his mother, his sister in a war zone and flee? You have to be the most cowardly piece of garbage ever existing in the history of mankind. Everybody would protect their wives, their sisters, their moms, etc. So this is an operation. And there's multiple tracks happening at the same time. And in some cases, they've actually told us this stuff, Jim. Like if you look, for example, at the UN's previous migration czar, his name was Peter Sutherland. He was a bigwig with Goldman Sachs, Irish originally, I believe. And he told the UN news service in an interview on camera that one of the reasons they're doing this is to undermine national homogeneity, to ultimately undermine national sovereignty. And we're watching that happen. So, it's further along in Canada and Western Europe than it is in the United States. But just look around the continent of Europe. Belgians are a small minority in their own capital of Brussels. The Dutch are a minority in Amsterdam. The British are a minority in London. The Germans are a minority in Frankfurt. The Swedes are a minority in Malmo. And so what happens is there's the gradual dismantling of national identity, where people wake up and they say, wait a minute, I'm surrounded by people who I have nothing in common with. We don't speak the same language. We don't have the same culture. We don't have the same values. I mean, we can't even talk to each other. Why do we have these arbitrary lines on a map that we call country? Let's just be European Union, or let's just be global citizens, as they say. So that's the long term. And to your point with the flags, I saw this happening in Sweden. The lesbian bishop of the Church of Sweden actually proposed seriously taking down the crosses from the churches to avoid offending the new, they call them the new Swedes. What she meant is, of course, the Islamic arrivals. She proposed setting up prayer rooms to Allah in these historic churches, some of them built 1,000 years ago, proposed taking down the crosses, things like this. So what we're watching is a steady and slow effort to undermine national identity and, of course, Christian civilization. But then on the other track, an effort to bring in huge numbers of people who will be used to create civil division, possibly civil unrest, and worst case scenario, and again, I think this is what they're angling for, especially in the United States, civil war. And we're already watching a lot of these people being recruited into security services. I mean, you've got Illinois, California, New York. These people are actually hiring illegal immigrants to carry guns and badges as police officers. They're bringing them into the National Guard, into the military. There's only one reason that I can think of why they would do that, and it's because they know that these people would be much more likely to fire on Americans who say won't give up their guns, won't agree to be locked in their house indefinitely, than a fellow American would be.
Well, that's a tactic that we saw in Canada during the COVID lockdowns as well. They didn't use local police or regional police or provincial police. They took police officers from far away, from other, in fact, some thought they might have been not even from Canada at some point, because there was a lot of questions about that. They wouldn't speak. They had a look about them that they weren't Canadian. But they did take police officers in, specialist units from outside those provinces, because for that very reason, Alex, they would have much more, less hesitation to get brutal and to get pretty hard with people if they're not going to, if their children aren't going to the same schools, their wives aren't going to the same meetings as their wives. So once again, that absolutely ties into this greater plan. I want to go back to something you said about George Soros. I think everybody knows just how devious this man is and how dangerous he is. Why is it that the true patriots within our intelligence services, our police forces, our military, our defense intelligence agencies, why are they not going after him? Why is it? Because they know what he's doing, from funding district attorneys all across the United States, doing away with laws, letting chaos reign, and he's on record saying that he absolutely hates the United States. Why has he not been taken out, do you think?
That's a very good question. And the list of crimes that this man has perpetrated is enormous. My colleague William Jasper did a big story in the New American outlining serious, specific criminal statutes at the federal and state level that George Soros has very openly and flagrantly been violating. So the question, why has nobody come after him yet? That's a good question. I have actually spoken with state attorneys general to try to figure out this question. I'm wondering why the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. is not doing anything. And all I have been hearing is that George Soros is a very difficult target. The guy's got more than enough money to hire the best attorneys in the world, and armies of them, right? He's got more than enough influence with politicians, not just across the United States, but around the world, who would come to his aid, who would portray any government that came after him as some sort of barbaric, fascist, or at least proto-fascist regime. And so I think there's a lot of fear there, to go back to the fear. He has scared them to the point where they know he's flagrantly committing crimes, but they also know that if they go after him, it will basically unleash hell on earth. They will be called every name in the book, and they may themselves be targeted for retaliation if and when the radical left, the globalists, the totalitarians manage to take power at the state or the federal level.
It's a very curious thing you say there, because I've wondered why we're seeing the National Guard being activated across 19 states in the United States. It was just a breaking news story yesterday and today. They're saying they're going to clean up Washington, D.C. They're going to get the crime off the streets. They're going to make these cities safe again. They're pushing back against sanctuary cities. I wonder if this is anticipation or readiness to actually go after those, to cut the head off the snake, as it were, because everybody knows how much George Soros is doing to destabilize nations. Viktor Orban in Hungary is never done talking about it. That's why he got thrown out of there. He got thrown out of Russia. He's been thrown out of a lot of countries. But I think to actually put a stop to it, they need to go after him. Perhaps consider him as a terrorist, running terrorist networks. And if they did that, that would then give them the legal precedent to go after him. And a Navy SEAL team going in to take him out, to take him into custody, rather, might be the way to do it. And then they can deal with the hurty words, the name callings, and the solicitors' letters later. But such is the level of disruption that what he's doing. I think that America, the United States, and our friends there don't have too much time to wait. But I wonder if what we're seeing in Washington, D.C., the mobilization of the National Guard, is for other reasons. Could it be linked to this, do you think?
It's possible. I had Kash Patel on my program shortly before he became the director of the FBI, and to hear him talk, I mean, the guy knows everything that we're talking about, Jim. He knows very well, and he was speaking pretty openly about all these things. So, to say that a lot of us are hoping for more would be a big understatement, right? Because we're dealing here with people who know. We know that they know, and so we're still hoping that we will see something. I do think that a big part of why Donald Trump is moving in this direction and why certain Republicans are moving in this direction is because they understand that we have a massive national security threat. Now, of course, we do have the crime problem. Washington, D.C., crime is out of control. Chicago, a lot of these cities, crime is out of control. And the president does have the authority under the U.S. Constitution to summon the militia to execute the laws of the Union. It's very rarely been done, and Congress has actually passed some very strong restrictions on that in the Posse Comitatus Act and others. And so generally speaking, I think law enforcement ought to be left to local law enforcement. But when you have a situation where the rights of people are in jeopardy, and we're seeing that now. We saw it during the first Trump administration, where you had crazy terror groups, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, not just burning down cities, literally taking over police departments, shooting police officers, burning down people's houses. We have a right, it says in our founding documents, to our houses. We have a right to our property. We have a right to our liberty. And if the local or the state government won't protect those rights, then somebody needs to do it. And in fact, the federal government agreed to provide a Republican form of government to every state in the union, and also to act as a backstop for all those rights. So I would like to think that the federal government is preparing to do some big things. And just today, I don't know if you saw, Jim, they raided John Bolton's house. Actually, before coming on with you today, I was with Roger Stone, who, of course, has been a close advisor to Donald Trump going back to the 80s. He says a lot more of that is coming. He said that a lot of these evildoers have already fled. He told me just last week that John Brennan had already fled. John Brennan was the former director of the CIA, a guy who admitted he was a communist. He went over to Austria, then fled apparently to Ireland. So apparently a lot of these guys are on the run. And I don't imagine they'd be running if they didn't have a good reason to be concerned. So hopefully good things happening. I don't have any inside knowledge of that, but we need to stay involved, because without public pressure, I think it'll be much harder to get justice on these things.
Well, I think that I heard that Comey might be getting targeted for a raid as well. That's the former FBI director. So, there is a lot of things happening. And of course, we don't always know. They're not going to reveal what their end game actually is. But you're right, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, these guys are great guys. They really are great people, and they know it. They understand it. But I just wondered if they have recognized the fact that if they leave it for too much longer, they are facing a massive national security threat. These far left Antifa groups, the BLMs, all of these people that we saw burning down American cities are still there. They're still as radical as ever. And if you don't pull the thorn out, if you don't grasp the nettle, if you don't deal with it, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And I think perhaps tough problems require tough solutions. And I think if Trump was to come out and actually go after the likes of Soros, he would get a lot of public support. Now, I appreciate that George Soros is a billionaire with huge connections, but he is the head of the snake, in my opinion. There are others, Bill Gates and others, for other reasons, that are really against humanity. These are almost like the merchants of the earth that's often talked about in the scriptures, Alex. And it wouldn't be right for me not to sort of come back to you with a couple of points on that, because as a Christian, I see parallels and a lot of similarities. That's what's going on that are almost astounding. And I just wonder if this global one world government that they are pushing so vigorously is an anticipation of this global leader that they're going to want to come in. And is this why they're trying to push this totalitarian, tyrannical kind of regime, lockdown, climate, whatever it is they're going to use, whatever excuse? Is this an anticipation? And can powerful countries like the United States of America and our friends around the world. Is it too late, or do you think we could get that pushback coming? But it would need to happen fairly quickly, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And, I'll start with what you said about climate change. Jim, I've been going to the UN's climate summits for the last 15 years. I've only missed a handful. I was in Azerbaijan last year. The year before that, I was in Arabia. The year before that, I was in Egypt. So I go to these things virtually every year. And I have watched how this climate narrative is the primary justification for almost everything that they're doing, and including on the religious front, which I'll get to in a moment. Even the mass immigration, right? They are claiming, and they have been claiming for a long time, that climate change is one of the major drivers of refugee flows. Of course, it's a total lie. In 2005, the UN predicted we were going to see 50 million climate refugees within 5 years. They even gave a little handy map with the areas that were supposed to produce the climate refugees in purple. It turns out those were the fastest growing areas population-wise in the world. Far from producing climate refugees, they were attracting huge numbers of people. But the climate change is the pretext for everything that they are doing at the international level. Usurping more power, right? It's a global problem, so we need global solutions. Deindustrializing the Western world. Well, American CO2 is bad, so we're going to shut down your power plants, which is going to shut down your factories. We're going to move them all to China, which already emits 300% more CO2 than you do in America, but somehow that's good for the climate, right? That's all you really need to know that the leaders of this crazy train don't even believe what they're saying. But the climate pretext is the justification for almost this whole edifice, for the economic transformation that we're watching, for the transformation of the energy grid, for the 15-minute cities, for all of these totalitarian policies. Now, to bring it to the religious level, I've been watching this very closely. My first hint at something funny was going on with this was in Cancun. The secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, Christiana Figueres, back then, she opens up the conference. She says, I'm going to open us up with a prayer. Oh, okay. So she says, Dear Ixchel, please give us the creativity to weave a tapestry of solutions to this climate crisis. So, I whip out my laptop. Who is this Ixchel? Turns out Ixchel was the Mayan goddess of cannibalism, war, and human sacrifice. Now, why would you open a climate summit with a prayer to a goddess of cannibalism and war and human sacrifice? Well, because they were giving us a strong clue, right? These people literally are preaching doctrines of demons. It's literally an agenda from the pit of hell. And then it got crazier. Right, 2015, the head of the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Rajendra Pachauri, comes out. He got caught molesting, sexually assaulting a bunch of women. He had to resign. And in his resignation letter, he says, hey, this whole saving the planet, saving the climate, this is more than just my mission. He said, it's my religion and my dharma. Oh, so this is a religious crusade for you, not a scientific issue. That's interesting. And then it gets crazier. So 2022 was a real eye-opener for me. I land in Egypt, and I get out the plane in Sharm el-Sheikh, and there's a big sign there that the UN had put up. It said, welcome to Egypt, dawn of the new consciousness, whatever. And they had a bunch of quotations from a pagan Egyptian document, apparently 4,000 years old. And it was something about the declaration of Maat, and you ought to let me into the afterlife, dear pagan deities, because it says, I have not polluted the water or the earth. So here we have a reframing of sin. Now, right before the UN Climate Summit, the UN Development Program had put out a report called Uncertain Times. And they said very explicitly the system of ethics and morality that evolved with mankind over thousands of years was no longer suitable to taking care of the planet. And so they called for changes in the way people behave based on new standards and codes of ethics and moralities, right in the report. So imagine my shock, Jim, when religious leaders from around the world pop up at this UN climate thing. The Pope himself was supposed to be there. He got sick, so he had to send the Vatican Secretary of State. And they announced that they're going to climb up to the top of Mount Sinai, or what they say is Mount Sinai. I think the real Mount Sinai is actually in Saudi Arabia, but it's subject for another day. They climb up to the top of Mount Sinai, and they unveil the new and supposedly improved 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments, they did a whole ceremony. The guy takes out the commandments, the 2 tablets painted green, smashes them on the floor. The 10 Commandments were things like we have to serve this interdependent, life-giving earth. We have to change our inner climate. Compassion means feeling the pain of Mother Earth. I mean, all kinds of pagan, pantheistic nonsense. And then they come down. And so I meet one of the organizers of this thing, the CEO of the Peace Department down at the UN Climate Summit. And I'm asking him about it. And he goes a step further. He says, look, not only did we bring about this new and improved 10 Commandments, he says we're also working on a third covenant. And I've got it on video, Jim. I could even show it if I could share a screen. He says, we're going to use this third covenant to build the kingdom of heaven here on earth. I get the sense that he didn't understand the gravity of what he was saying. But that's what they're doing, right? So God gave us the original 10 commandments. The UN and Friends gave us this new and supposedly improved 10 commandments. God gave us the old covenant. God gave us the new covenant. The UN Friends and Friends are now giving us this new and improved third covenant that we're going to use to build the kingdom of heaven here on earth. So, folks, we're watching now, and I could keep going on here. The UN has a little para organization. It's called Religions for Peace. And the head of this thing in Egypt, her name was Dr. Aza Karam. She came out of the UN's population control arm. She says on camera, we are the UN of religions. All religions, she says, are members of Religions for Peace. And she's dead serious, right? All of their false religions are members of Religions for Peace, and they are unifying them all. I actually interviewed the head of UNEP, the UN Environment Program. Same thing. He's got an initiative called the Faith for Earth Initiative. It's an official UN program where they say we're bringing all the religions of the world together to save Mother Earth. And so I drilled him down a little bit. Clearly not a Bible scholar. He said, if you read the Revelation of John, you'll see an image of a great flood. No, actually, that was Noah. That was in Genesis, right? But so these people are dead serious. They're using climate change as a pretext, not just for mass migration, but for the pretext to build the one world political, economic, and religious system. And they're doing it right under our noses.
Unbelievable. I mean, I tell you what, I mean, I've learned something there. I did not know that they had, what was it, Eshquel, that they had. I mean, that is just crazy. But this is the thing. And one of the things I've noticed is that people do treat this climate emergency, so-called, as a religion, this saving the earth, saving the planet. And I'm reminded of Professor Dennis Meadows in a very infamous YouTube clip. You'll have seen it, where he was talking about the need to cull the numbers of people on the earth to save the planet. This is the kind of language that they use. And he went on to describe how he hoped that it could be done peacefully. You know, in other words, he wants people to commit suicide. We've seen in Canada, going back to Canada, we've seen this push to get people to actually commit suicide, that is state-sponsored, MAID, it's called, medical assistance in dying. Horrific. And now they're doing the same thing in Australia. Now they've been voting on assisted dying in the United Kingdom. They have no regard for human life. They have no regard for humanity itself. And indeed, we've got the likes of Yuval Harari, the chief advisor to founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, coming out and saying, well, AI could probably do a better job of having a religion, could be rewriting the Bible and calling the religion datism. He is an arch technocrat and a highly dangerous and unpalatable guy. When you hear people talking like that, and then you come out with the kind of evidence that you've been given there in great detail, Alex, are we left with any doubt of what time that we're in? I mean, the hour would be short, in my opinion. Do you think we're heading to that period of time that's often prophesied to happen?
Absolutely, no question. And I encourage people to read their Bibles and come to a different conclusion or explain to me the parallels, right? And Yuval Noah Harari is such a good example of this. I mean, one of the guy's recent books, Homo Deus, he actually argues that we are going to become man, or at least some of us, right? The rest of us will, I guess, die out and become obsolete. But some of us are going to evolve into gods. And so I've got clips of this guy. He said, Jesus is fake news. Jesus' resurrection, that's totally fake news. What's real news is that ye shall be as gods, right? We're going to upgrade ourselves. We're going to modify our genetic code. We're going to merge with computer systems, and we're going to become Homo Deus. We're going to evolve from Homo sapiens, which what we are now, to these Homo Deus, these God men. And this is like literally, and I mean literally in the literal sense, is literally the oldest lie in the book, Jim. It's exactly what Satan said to Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, right? When you eat thereof, ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. So it's very uncreative. It's the oldest lie in the book. It's clearly from the pit of hell. And they're openly talking about this now. They're openly building a one world political, economic, and religious system. They're openly talking about becoming gods. They're openly worshiping the creation, right? Go read Romans 1, what happens when people suppress the truth. I mean, it's all around us, Jim. So I would encourage non-believers, just spend a little time reading the scriptures and ask God, say, God, if you're real, show me what I need to know here. And if you knock, he will open.
It's very true. He does. The power of prayer is incredible. Let's talk about the solutions, because, I mean, some of this is quite scary stuff. It's quite frightening stuff. Freedom Train International is always telling people, don't be scared, be prepared. Get some oil in your lamps, to use another scriptural context. Don't wait till it's too late. And I agree with you, Alex. I think people should read the Bible. I actually, people don't always realize this. I've got a copy of the King James. It just sits there, and I do read it. Not when I'm doing a podcast like this, but I do read it. But here's the thing. People sometimes don't always realize they've maybe been brought up in the Christian faith, and maybe they don't maybe go to church. They maybe, and I'm not here to judge anybody, but I think when you start to actually peel back what's going on at the global level, when you see climate lockdowns being enacted in Canada with such draconian measures being put in place, you can't not draw that same parallels to what is talked about in the good book. But here's the thing. Freedom Train International is about offering solutions to people. And if you're watching this right now, I highly recommend you go to freedomtraininternational.org, do it as soon as this podcast is over, or open up another window and do it right now and get subscribed, because the knowledge and the information that's contained in there will teach you exactly what you need to do. But you need to start doing it right now, because the hour is late. So what we're encouraging people to do, Alex, I'd love to get your opinion on this, is grow your own food. Try to create local communities, local hubs with people that you know, people that have got specific skill sets, doctors, nurses, police officers, people that can grow food, like farmers, food producers, car mechanics, dentists, people that are useful, and build up a little bit of a network with them. Because if we are heading towards that great period of chaos, I think, was it Russ Dizdar, I think, wrote about the Black Awakening. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, Alex, or not, but he talked about a period of chaos where millions of people who are following this crazy ideology might go a bit even crazier and actually start to rise up and commit acts of serious violence. And going back to your point about the massive amounts of illegal immigration, it is for a reason. It's not happening by chance. But we're all about solutions. I mean, what would you be saying to people, apart from reading the good book and getting familiar with all of the scriptures? What else would you say to people in terms of growing your own food? Do you think people should put some supplies aside? Do you think we should help ourselves in some regards? I mean, having faith is incredibly important. I always teach people that you've got to be physically fit, mentally fit, and spiritually fit, because all three parts are incredibly important. Would you like to expand on any parts of that?
Yeah, amen. I'll start by saying I couldn't agree with you more. I always tell people the first and most important thing is to get right with the Lord, and don't listen to what they taught you in school. Don't listen to what the talking head says on TV. They're lying to you, right? Just go look for yourself. The Bible doesn't say what your teacher told you it said. So start there. As far as growing your own food, I could not agree with you more. In fact, we're in the final phases of getting our farm ready to go. We've been working on this for a long time. We've got cows, we've got orchards, we've got all sorts of different mechanisms like that. Nice community to work with, and I encourage people, getting plugged in to a community like you just described, Jim, is absolutely critical. Like during COVID, if you were isolated and alone in your own house, I don't know how you made it through the last few years of the COVID crazy. If you're surrounded by like-minded, reasonable people who you can talk to, you can bounce ideas off of, you're going to be much better off. And if they have useful skills like dentistry, medicine, self-defense, food production, mechanics, engineering, all those things will come in incredibly handy no matter what happens. And it's nice, even if everything works perfectly for the next 20 years, it'd be nice to have that community of friends. So do that. One thing that I emphasize very heavily, Jim, is family and children. Right now, I would argue that one of their most important weapons is actually the government school system, or really it's masquerading as a school system. Really, it's an indoctrination system. And I can't urge parents more strongly than I do to protect their children from that. You must get them a real education. They're not being educated right now by government. And it's the same thing happening all over the world. I don't care what country you live in. It's all over Europe. It's all over Africa. It's all over the United States. It's everywhere. It's coming down from UNESCO, the UN Education Agency. They're literally teaching your children doctrines of demons. They're handicapping them mentally, spiritually, morally, academically. And so I always tell people, think of the government school building like it's on fire. Okay, if your children are trapped in a burning building, you don't wonder who on the school board you ought to be writing a letter to. You run in the building, you grab your child, and you run out of the building as quickly as your legs will carry you, even if it costs you your life. That's the sense of urgency that we need to have here. They're weaponizing our children against us as parents. They're weaponizing our children against our churches, against our nations, against our civilization. And so you've got to get them educated properly. My wife and I, we've chosen to homeschool. We do classical conversations, and I can't say enough good things about it. 135,000 students around the world. But you can start small, and you don't need to be an expert at this. You can't do a worse job than the government's doing. So if I could leave people with one piece of advice, other than the things that we discussed with the food production and getting right with God and all that, take charge of the education of your children. Nothing is more important when it comes to preparing, protecting, and making plans for the future. And of course, God has given us clear instructions on this issue as well. So those would be my really strong recommendations, Jim.
Well, I mean, actually, it's an incredibly important part in all of this. And I just want to stay with this for a moment, because a lot of people would say, do you know what, I didn't go to university. I didn't do that well in school. How could I possibly teach maths and arithmetic and English and French or German or whatever it might be you're learning? But actually, I think you're absolutely right. I think people should seriously think about homeschooling their children while it's still legal. And I say that because in Germany it's banned. In other parts of Europe it's banned. Sweden, yeah. They're trying to ban it in the United Kingdom as well. Why? Well, because they can't indoctrinate your children if you're homeschooling them. But it's not that hard to do. Children can get a good education with very basic stuff. They don't need to be taught all the kind of things that, quite frankly, we go through school when we were younger, learning about physics or chemistry. I mean, it's handy to know if you're going into that kind of field. But actually, a good grounded education on the truth and what really matters is far, far more important, because you really called it there when you said that they were indoctrination camps. That's exactly what the school systems have become. And even good teachers who don't agree with it, if they speak against the system, they will lose their jobs, or they'll be hounded by a bunch of far left crazies and hounded out of the community. So I absolutely think it's very, very important as part of the preparations that you actually get your children away from that. Really, really important, because they're teaching them crazy, crazy stuff, and it's harmful. The other thing that I would say is that when you are prepared, when you understand what's coming, a lot of people think, well, if I delve too much into this, I'm going to get terrified. No, you won't. You need to know what's coming. But the more you prepare, even in small ways, the less fearful you become. And that's incredibly important, going back to the earlier parts of the conversation where we talked about fear as a weapon that these globalist parasites use against populations. If you've got a little bit of food aside, if you've got a way to filter water, if you've got some supplies to hand, a good medical kit, a bug-out bank, a plan, a place of safety that you can go, whether you're bugging in or whether you're bugging out, these are incredibly important parts. We cover all of this on freedomtraininternational.org. You need to get to that website. You need to get subscribed. You need to start training and learning all about it. It's not that hard. We cater for people that have never done this before, to those who are intermediate, to those who are actually at advanced levels, even to the point of teaching people how to buy land, how to relocate, how to buy a farm, how to buy a smallholder of different sizes. So it caters for everybody. But I go back to this point about not being afraid. Fear is one of the biggest things that they will use against us. And the more prepared we are, psychologically, we lose the fear. We're no longer afraid of whatever might happen because you've got a little bit of a buffer. You've got a hedge of protection around you, and you're not so afraid. And if everybody does that, then you build up those communities, people you can trust, family, extended family, and that's how it works. So I think it's a very, very important point. Education is incredibly important. My goodness, I've just checked the time. We're almost at the very last part, Alex. I'm so glad that I've had a chance to get a proper conversation with you. I've been meaning to do it for a long time, and I was really pleased that you were coming on. But for the last few minutes, I'm going to, as I always do with my incredible guests, I'm going to give you the floor to say whatever it is that you want to say. Could be to do with what's happening in Canada. It could be to do with the more sort of strategic things that we've been talking about with the globalists and what they're planning. But the floor is yours. On you go.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's been a great honor and a pleasure. I really appreciate all the work that you do. And I want to emphasize all that you said. It's such a good idea. And being, some people will try to convince you that you're being paranoid if you prepare. It's exactly the opposite, right? A threat of not being able to go to the grocery store if you don't take a microchip or download an app on your phone for CBDCs is a lot less serious if you're going to be fined for a few weeks or a few months or even indefinitely than it would be if your children are going to starve if you don't comply. So just take some basic preparations. Even the Bible says, the prudent man sees danger coming and prepares himself and takes cover. It's the fool that doesn't do anything about it. We have an obligation, especially if you have family members. As the Bible says, if you don't take care of your own family, you're worse than an infidel. So folks, it's a really serious admonition. We have an obligation to be good stewards of what we've been given. And I want to, in the last minute we have or whatever, I want to just end with a real encouragement to people that God's already got all this under control. There's no reason for us to be scared. Eternity is coming. God has already won the victory. That doesn't give us an excuse to do nothing. That doesn't absolve us of our responsibility. He's given us clear instructions for what we ought to be doing, starting with governing ourselves properly, living the way that we are supposed to, doing the things that we're called to, raising our children the way that we're called to, and then being active members of the church and the community. And, for those who don't yet know the Lord, I just want to encourage you. The Bible says that all of us have sinned. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. And of course, when you've sinned against an infinite God, the magnitude of that sin is infinite. There's no way that you could do anything to repay that. It's not like you could do enough good deeds to overcome the magnitude of your sin. There's only one way, and that's through Jesus Christ. So I would encourage people, open up your Bibles, start in the Gospel of John. If you don't know your Bible, just pick up any Bible, look for it, Gospel of John. It's right there early on in the New Testament. Start there. Be in prayer about it, and get over to Freedom Train International. I encourage you to get to my website, libertysentinel.org. Stay well informed, because they will keep lying to us. They will keep deceiving us. Being fearless and knowledgeable is one of the best things we can do to resist that. And thank you again, Jim, for having me on. Thanks for all that you do to wake people up around the world. It's been a real blessing to be with you.
Well, I just have to say, Alex, this has gone past all too fast. I've very much enjoyed speaking with you. You're a real paragon of wisdom and truth and knowledge. And I've always enjoyed listening to your podcasts and other shows that you've been on as well. In fact, I just came across one. I'll probably be posting it again tomorrow. I forget who you're on with, but it was a very good podcast. So, look, I want to say a thank you to you for the great work that you're doing. For standing up for your faith as well. It takes courage to do that. It's not easy in this world where Christians in particular are being persecuted around the world. We see it even in the United Kingdom with street pastors being arrested and locked up. It's just absolutely crazy stuff. But at the same time, we stand strong and we stand united, because unity is strength. So I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to Alex. It's been wonderful having you on. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, and God bless you too, Jim, and everybody out there. God bless you guys as well.
To all my wonderful Freedom Train International ambassadors, I just want to say a massive thank you as well. You've had some amazing guests on, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, United States, all around the world. They did another great job of exposing what's going on and standing up for freedom and the truth. They're great people, and I'm very, very fortunate to have such a good team around me, and I really do appreciate them. I also very much appreciate all of you in the international community who are sharing this. There are many, many thousands of you who are reposting this content, who are standing behind me, who are financially supporting me, whether you're buying me a coffee or whether you're donating to the Freedom Train. It is appreciated, because the fight for freedom, it costs, and it costs us personally sometimes. And we have to do what we believe in. We have to do what we believe is right. But we do it, and we do it with your support, and I'm very, very grateful to each and every one of you. To all the new members who have been following me recently, just over the last few days and weeks, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. And I love to watch and listen to the comments, and I do try to reply to as many of you as I can. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed the show. I certainly have. It's been a great honor to be on with Alex Newman, and I just want to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you. Remember, as the world gets darker, we get brighter. Keep fighting for truth. Keep fighting for freedom, and thank you for supporting Freedom Train International. It is appreciated. So until next time, stay safe, stay free, stay strong. This is Jim Ferguson on behalf of Freedom Train International. We'll speak soon. Bye-bye and good night.
wheels ignite, iron and fury, black smoke in the night, globalist fear. The train draws near.